Hi, I'm Jan Ozer. I'm here today with David Ronca. We know him from Netflix and Meta. Now he's off on his own with RoncaTech. We're going to be talking about a product that's near and dear to his heart called VCAT, and it's a Android benchmarking tool that I've tested. There's a review on Streaming Media Magazine at this point, but it's been updated, and we're going to hear about the updates, and you're going to see a demo of it right now. So, David, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks a lot, Jan. It's great to be here. Great to see you again since Denver. And yeah, we're really excited. We're just getting ready to roll VCAT out into beta. We've done a lot of work. We had to make a lot of changes in order to catch up with all of the power and security changes in the Android ecosystem, and effectively ended up rewriting the entire app from the ground up to work properly in the latest versions of Android. We're excited now. We're ready to share it out.
Okay, so for the one or two people who may not have read my review, why don't you give us about a 30-second overview about what VCAT is designed to do?
Sure. VCAT stands for Video Codec Acid Test, and to be specific, it's Video Decoder, but the VCAT moniker is quite clever. And an acid test, for anybody who's not familiar with the term, is really whatever you happen to be testing, whether it's a car, structural load bearing, a piece of equipment, military hardware, computers, whatever. The acid test is pushing that to its absolute limits to make sure that it can actually stand up and withstand that test condition. And so I kind of, just a little bit of a play on words, a video codec acid test. We're not quite pushing anything to the limits, but we are, the intention is really to collect very, very important telemetry on Android devices while we're decoding video, and then to use that for making decisions on how you might deploy various codecs on those devices.
Okay, it feels like at least a bit of the genesis of the product related back to when you rolled out AV1 with Reels, and you needed, there was a lot of low-end Android phones that, that really may or may not be able to play AV1, and you didn't have a way to benchmark that effectively, and then so you kind of built that yourself.
Yeah, if you go back and read the tech blogs that we put out at Meta over the years, we first rolled out AV1 on iOS, which was like really low-hanging fruit. The devices are very powerful. There's a small set of devices, easy to understand. And then we started expanding into Android. And again, if we targeted like the most powerful, it was really an easy problem. But the thing is, Meta serves 3.5 billion users, literally half the world's population. And most of the devices are not high-end devices, and they're not iOS devices. And so to really get meaningful reach with AV1, we really had to understand and target mid and low-tier devices. And that's where VCAT comes in, is really, we found that there wasn't a lot of really like testing on video, like because what we really care about, what we cared about when I was there and what Meta, of course, still cares about, it's always user experience, right? And the reason to deliver AV1 or any codec is because you're going to improve the experience for users, right? Improve it through reduced bit rate, through higher quality, et cetera. And so trying to understand how we could deliver a improved experience on low-end devices, it means you can't regress battery in a meaningful way. It means you can't have thermal events. It means you can't have excess frame drops, all these other issues. And how we could understand that really kind of became the problem. And that's where VCAT, this app, came in, because we did a lot of manual testing. I personally did a lot of manual testing, hours and hours, overnight testing, phones everywhere I went. I would have phones in the car, timers would go off, I'd run out and collect telemetry and everything. And it just, I just came to a point where I said, there has to be a better way. And that really was the motivation for VCAT. I did pitch it to leadership at Meta, who have always been very supportive of investments in the ecosystem, right? Through open source tools, SVT-AV1, David, now VCAT, things that are going to help the ecosystem move forward, because when the ecosystem moves forward, Meta moves forward. So anyway, so they were enthusiastic. We funded that, partnered with Idiom, and we've been working on it since about late November of 2024.
Okay. And there's two components. There's VCAT that runs on the Android phone, and there's VCAT Web. What are you going to be showing us today?
Today we're just going to focus on the application and how it works, and then perhaps for another day we can look at VCAT Web.
Okay. And VCAT Web lets you just remotely run VCAT either via a direct cable connection or even Wi-Fi, and then you can control multiple phones from one web server on a Mac or Windows computer. Does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah, I mean, the motivation, there were a few motivations for VCAT Web. First of all, it is a web browser. It's not, it's you're running locally on your Mac or Windows, talking to phones that are plugged in through the USB or that you're debugging over Wi-Fi. The motivation was just that Android security, or mobile device security, because it's not just Android, limits things you can and can't know about a device. For example, you can know the total CPU usage, but you can't get per core. You can get your app memory. You can't always get other, like system. You can get system. They're just things you can and can't get. And having that interface and using the Android debugging tool, ADB, allows you to get a much richer set of telemetry. However, it presents challenges. For example, one of the main reasons we built VCAT is to do battery drain tests. Obviously, if you have a USB cable plugged in, the battery's not going to drain. So there are ways around that. There's lab USB devices but they're not cheap. But there are devices you could actually have a USB-C connection without power. It would be effectively a data-only connection. But so VCAT Web, it started out, excuse me, as a monitoring device, so you could actually live monitor tests. It kind of morphed into a postmortem. Even though you can still live monitor, it's more useful for opening up log files and presenting them.
I mean, it's a very, I looked at it in the review. It's a very convenient way to get the files off and on.
Yes, you can actually import the telemetry file. You can get the raw CSV. You can convert it. It'll convert it conveniently to a tabbed Excel spreadsheet.
And the graphs. The data is much more well presented.
Yes, it is. But unfortunately, it's limited. If you're only collecting telemetry from the app, then you don't have I'd like to have per core CPU loads, and that's one of the things that we can't get from an app. You have to be using ADB and a plugged-in system to get per core CPU load. Okay,
and VCAT itself is an Android app. As you said, you don't really need to benchmark iPhones. They all can play pretty much anything. Why don't you?
I don't know that it's. I wouldn't say we don't need to, or we don't want to. I would simply say, you invest where the biggest problem is. And the biggest problem is understanding how video decoders perform on $90 phones and not on $1,000 phones. So, but I do think that a VCAT iOS could be useful, right?
It's when I worked with VCAT, I was pretty impressed with how easy it made testing phones, because I, like you, have tested phones before, and it's brutal because you can't say anything. You're looking at video, you don't know what's happening in the battery, you don't know what's happening with CPU, and VCAT really just took care of that. I'd love to see a model or a version of it that ran on iOS, but we're not going to see it today, so let's get to...
You're not going to see it today, and I'll go ahead and plug. That would be an interesting project. As I am now in my own little company, if somebody was really interested in that, we would love to talk about a possible sponsorship where RoncaTech and Idiom could build an iOS tool for the industry if somebody will provide some sponsorship for that.
Okay, so this is not when we wanted to cover it, but we're kind of in the neighborhood of this information. Who owns VCAT, and how is it going to be available? And open source, not open source. Talk about that.
Yeah. So that's a really good question, and that's also gone through a lot of changes with the rewrite. of VCAT. We originally started out as a building onto the VLC and VLC benchmark apps, but it was the problem with power management and having two apps is kind of you had a VLC and benchmark would control VLC, and just after a period of time, VLC would finish playing a video, it would hand control back to benchmark or VCAT, and VCAT's not there anymore because it got shut down by the system in a power management mode. So, and a media player will not get throttled for power management, but non-media apps will. And so we ended up having to make VCAT its own media player. We made a decision at that time just to move away from the VLC model, go straight to ExoPlayer. The main motivation for that, we could have easily plugged in VLC. The main motivation was that, excuse me, most companies that have video apps are using ExoPlayer. They're not using VLC. And so it was a feedback I got from people within Meta, like, this is cool, but it would really be better for us if you were using ExoPlayer. That way we could get better repros. So we just decided to let's go ahead and go to Exo. When we went there, we had already rewritten everything almost completely. And it's like, well, let's just go ahead and finish this. Let's separate from the VLC benchmark legacy or model and just stand up a new clean VCAT, which is exactly what we've done. So now we have VCAT, which has no connection or no code or UI or any other resource connection into the VLC or benchmark projects. So then it's, okay, how do we put this out? Who owns it? And I had a conversation with Meta, and they just really felt like, being the nature of the app, it's not really something they wanted to support. And so they were like, well, why don't you just release it? So VCAT will actually be released by RoncaTech. Mm-hmm. It'll be licensed. The basic license will be GPL 2 for commercial, non-commercial. There's no restrictions there. The only restriction is on building and distributing private or applications. That would be a conversation that if a company had a use case where they were interested in that, we would have to have that conversation. I would say that there would probably be some kind of non-GPL licensing available, but that would not be the free version. So it will be free. It will be available to anybody, commercial or non-commercial, for use however they see fit. And it'll just be bound by GPL2 terms.
Okay, so that means GitHub, I can download a copy?
It will be on GitHub. It will also be on Play Store.
Okay.
In fact, the beta, when we launch the beta will launch from Play Store. It'll be a private beta, email invitation only, so when people sign up, when we put VCAT out for beta, they'll get an email saying, here's your link. And you go on your Android device with that link, and you can install from Play Store, and then you can run VCAT like that.
Okay. So let's get to the demo. What are you going to show us?
So I have a Motorola E14, which is a $90 Android device available on Amazon. And I have installed VCAT here. It's a clean install. So we're going to start out with the initial setup. When I launch it, first thing I have to do is enable permissions. We need to access the system settings, and we need to be able to access the local file system. Now it brings us up, and this is what VCAT looks like. We're sitting here with no test vectors at all, but it's just telling us the device at the top, and we have our tabs at the bottom. So I'm going to look at a couple of these tabs. First thing is I need some test content. So we have this tab on the end called Test Vectors, and right now the only test vector catalog that's available is the one I've hosted on S3. But I'm just going to go in here and select a few videos to bring down to the system. And I'm going to hit the download. And these will pull down. While we're downloading, I will say you don't have to do it this way. You can move media files over to the phone, your Android phone, using either ADB, or you can just download from Google Drive, whatever. Once their files are on there, you can create new playlists, which I'm going to show in just a minute. And then you can test. So you don't have to do this, but this allows you to have some kind of pre-canned or some canned test vectors. So now if we go back to that main UI, you can see I have a few playlists here. If I click one of these, obviously my choices are edit, play, or delete. And then I have the button down here at the bottom, which is a create. So again, if you have your own videos on the device, you can create new playlists. I'm not going to do that right now.
Okay, one question. The files that you showed us, are those going to be generally available, or?
They're already available. When you install VCAT and go to this test vectors tab, it's going to show you what's available now. And then the plan what I'm working on, there's still some features here. When you hit the folder, you'll be able to browse out. For example, if somebody, let's just create a scenario. Let's say that the YouTube people say, okay, here's the VCAT test for YouTube, right? They have some videos and they've got some conditions or whatever. They could share those in a zip file. You could download that zip file to your Android, unzip it, and then you'd be able to browse with the folder. You see the folder at the icon, it's not connected right now. You'd be able to browse out to those local test vectors and import them in, and that would bring in both the media and the playlist into the VCAT ecosystem, right? So, but what I do for now is, or what I've got right now is just these are actually the test vectors that we were using for all of our battery tests. For anytime you see a graph where we look at battery power drain, these are actually the test files we're using. AV1, they're FD2, 360 through 1080p, and then we have VP9 corresponding.
When you say vector, I mean, the playlists I saw were just a list of files and within
Yeah. So when I say test vector is media files and a playlist that executes on those files.
Okay, got it.
So this is actually a list. These are playlists here, right? These are the RoncaTech VCAT playlists. And when I could select them all, but it takes a little while to download the larger ones. So I just selected the small ones, and when I imported those, it brought the media in, but it also brought the playlists in. So if I were to go out in files and go to VCAT/media, you'd actually see the VP9 and AV1 FD2 folders there that are populated.
And if you just want to, if you want to download your own files, you can make a playlist in 30 seconds. So there's nothing.
All you do is do this. You go out and browse out and find entries, right? I'm going to go, I don't know where I am. Let's see. Moto E14. I go to VCAT. I go to media. There's actually a media file. So if you have media files on your device, you can easily create your own playlist in just a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the next tab I want to take you to are the run conditions, or the test conditions. So in this case, we have the things that we care about. We've got the screen brightness. Below that, we have the decoder threads. And then we have the run option. So once you've got a playlist set up that you're going to execute for a test, how do you want to run that? Well, your options here are run at once, run until the battery reaches a specific level, in this case 15%, which is my favorite test, or run for some set amount of time. So that's your run options. Finally, we have the decoder configuration, and this is where you can actually select the decoders that get used. In this case, I want to use the Unisoc, right? I always want to use a built-in. If you have a hardware, you could use the hardware. So this is actually what we call the test conditions. So this, given the input videos, this is how we're going to execute against those.
And just to be clear, people have choices on the decoder. You can try different software alternatives. You can try different applications, or as you pointed out, you can make sure you're playing the hardware, which is typically what you want to do.
Well, I mean, if you're benchmarking AV1 software, obviously you would want to do different. And in that case, like on this device, you could benchmark the VCAT bundled decoder. You could benchmark the Unisoc, which is the chipset software decoder, or you could bundle the Android David or Android GAV1 decoders. So you could actually benchmark any of those. Obviously, if there was hardware, if we go look at the AVC, you can actually see the Unisoc, that C2, those are hardware decoders. Same, I think, with HEVC. Yeah, you can see the C2, those are HEVC hardware decoders.
And what about, do you still have VVC down there? I mean, I couldn't run VVC on the E13 I tested.
Yeah, you can't run VVC right now because it's not connected. And it wasn't connected even in you tested the hybrid VLC benchmark version of VCAT. And even in that, it wasn't yet connected. So for beta, when we go to beta next week, we will have bundled software decoder for David, which will be like David 1.5. We won't yet have the bundled VLC, and unless VVC. So unless there's a VVC decoder available on the device you're playing on already, you would not be able to do VVC tests. But it's really important to me. I think that's going to be a really important benchmark. And so we will be working on that ASAP. But we want to get the beta. Like I said, for beta, we'll just have the bundled AV1 decoder along with the H.264 and HEVC.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So now we go back, and I'm going to go ahead and pick one of my tests. I'll do the this one, and so we'll have the
open that up. Sorry, is that going to have multiple files in it? I just want
it just has a single file.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
So yeah, I mean that's just because that's the way I set it up. I want to run a 1080, 720, 540, or 360p video until the battery drains. That's all I'm doing. So we just loop on that until the battery gets below 15%. So given I have this, if I hit play, it's going to start playing. And now if we touch the screen, you'll see two things. You have a cancel button and you have a screen information button, which brings up an overlay, gives you details. You can see the decoder. In fact, we're using the Unisoc AV1 decoder. You can see the frame rate. We'll be adding more information to this over time. But yeah, so this is the information overlay. Generally, you don't want that on. And then, so this will run. If I left it alone, this would run. And actually, it would run forever because I have USB, but if I unplug the USB, it would run until the battery hit 15%. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here. And the last thing I want to take you to is the results page, and that's the little reports icon down at the bottom. And I have a few reports here. I left a couple around, and I want to find the right one. So here's one. You can see we ran the device from battery went from 100% to 35%. They ran for a little more than 10 hours. We had the Unisoc AV1 decoder. We were decoding 720p video. And yeah, you can see where we started. So this is just a test summary. If you want the detailed telemetry, you have to bring your report, your CSV report file onto a system and bring it into a spreadsheet to examine.
Okay. Why don't you talk about the telemetry that unless you want to show us the spreadsheet, why don't you tell us what's in the spreadsheet?
Yeah, so I could tell you there's about 40 columns. So we have the battery draw, the current, we have the battery level in percent, we have the battery level in milliamps, we have the battery draw in milliamps, we have the core frequencies for all cores, the current core frequency, we have system memory, app memory, we provide information in there, which codec is being used, and the file that's being played, the resolution, frame rate, etc. Because obviously if you have a multi-file playlist where you're going through different video types, you want to be able to see where that's changing.
What about smoothness? We're seeing battery life. What about playback smoothness?
Frame drops. We do track frame drops, yes.
Okay. Okay. What have been any big insights, or is this, is it just an easier way to get information you already knew?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
After using VCAT for a long time, what additional insights have you gotten into the differences between Android phones, or did it just kind of confirm what you already knew?
Well, I mean, yeah, so there are things that we have learned along the way, and I shared about this at Mile High Video. You know, even though the specs may look similar, all devices are not created equal. And what we've found is there's some big buckets. Obviously, is it a ARM7, an ARM8, ARM9? That's the first division. ARM7 we ignore. 8 and 9 we want to work on. If it's an 8, is it an earlier, older generation with A53 class cores, which tend to be, they run at a higher clock speed, they burn more power, they tend to have more leakage? Or is it a newer, modern A55 class device, which tend to be much more efficient? They run at lower clock speeds, and you can actually get significantly more runtime when, for example, software decoding AV1. Other things, you know, that we learned about how much memory, what about the memory bus bandwidth? You know, some of these things are easy to know. Some of them you can't, you can easily look and see, does this have ARM7, 8, or 9? Does it have, if it's an 8, does it have A53 or A55 cores? But you can't say, hey, what's the bus speed, you know, or what version of memory controller? So we're still looking at those kind of problems because we believe, you know, we have some proxy tests we developed that could give us clues about bus speed. And all of this helps us make decisions. Like if you're a streaming application, right? Ideally, there's a few things we want to know. Like with VCAT, first of all, we want to have a good benchmark for devices for video playback, where perhaps, you know, think about a non-tech or, you know, way devices are benchmarked. Perhaps they'll start getting a scoring system for video. So maybe like if you go to Amazon or Walmart and you're looking at $90 phones, and you might look at one like this E14, and let's just say it has a really pretty high score for a $90 phone. And you might look at another one, I won't mention a brand, but let's say you look at a phone, even though it's new, it's built on a much older SoC architecture, and it might actually have a low score. And today you wouldn't know, right, which, you know, oftentimes you'll find the weakest phones really look cool. And like the Moto phones, they look pretty basic, right, utilitarian, but it's a really good phone. And you see these phones with really fancy body and camera and, you know, lens cover and everything. It looks like really like high tech, and then you realize it's like sitting on 8, 9, 10-year-old SoC technology. So we'd actually like to help clear the market out and get towards newer, more powerful devices at the low end. But also understanding, you know, think about like a Meta or another company trying to make a decision on how do I deliver a good experience to a device? And, you know, by understanding like device capabilities, like some devices could handle perhaps AV1 level 3.0, which would be up to 540p. Some could handle 3.1, which would typically be 720p, both at 30 FPS. Some could go 4.0, which would be 1080 at 30, or perhaps 4.1 up to 60 at 1080p. And understanding that, and, you know, helps you make good decisions. And even better yet, if you can understand that easily programmatically, like my app's on the phone, I'm going to probe a few vectors, I'm going to look at a few things and say, yeah, this is a level 3.1 phone. That's really where we want to get. So that's like a secondary goal of VCAT, is really to help establish clean benchmarking and understanding of devices so that we can create some knowledge base that video streamers or caps could actually make better decisions on the devices.
So beyond publishers like Meta or, you know, other UGC sites like that, who are the other targets to use this? Who do you see using it over the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and we're getting into areas where I'm not an expert, but I will simply say this is kind of my thought, or one of the motivations. Imagine if you're a network operator, and every year you have bundled phones, right? And you may have expensive phones, and then you may have very low-cost phones. And, you know, again, think of this like, again, I'll use the Moto because we spent so much time on that phone, the E13, E14. They're really, really good devices. Imagine, you have multiple vendors. One is a E14, and one is one of these devices I've told you about that have a much older SoC, much less performant. Right now, you really wouldn't know how you run some benchmarking. They do have benchmarking, but it doesn't really tell you like the video decode performance, right? And software and hardware both are very critical, and I think it would be useful to understand how those perform in terms of battery life, in terms of system load, thermal, and everything. And again, I don't think it's just a software problem. I think it's a hardware issue too. I think being able to understand how these devices perform is really important. So I imagine network operators could then benchmark, and they would look at this older phone technology in the E14 and say, wow, these are both the same price. This E14 is a really good phone, right? And then they would maybe make a decision. I'm not trying to pitch Moto because there are other vendors that have similar capable devices with similar performance benchmark capabilities. But basically they would say, okay, here's this class of low-end devices that perform well. Here's ones that don't perform so well. We want this tier. They basically establish a line. That then kind of lets the handset vendors know, hey, maybe we should be using VCAT because they're going to use VCAT on our devices when they're making bundling decisions. And so they would probably want to use them too. And I've gotten feedback from handset vendors that they are very much interested in VCAT when it's ready. And then ultimately, if the SoC vendors say, hey, when we're pitching our reference designs for the next generation phones, or these low-end phones for these handset vendors, they're going to run VCAT, so we better run VCAT too. And kind of hope that everybody can, I'll actually use a slight analogy. The motivation for VMAF way back when I pitched it to the leadership at Netflix and was able to secure funding was like, look, what we need is a metric that everybody can agree on for video quality, right? And it's open, it's royalty-free, available for everybody, and we can all gel around it. And now we all talk the same language when we're talking about video quality, because that was a problem. So here's like kind of a variation of that. What if we have like a metric for video decode performance on devices that we can all gel around? So we're all talking about the same thing. We're all looking at it the same way. So think of it kind of maybe in that way, which I never thought about before, but it is kind of there is a correlation there.
Certainly VMAF has become the new quality level everybody kind of knows.
And it's not perfect, and it can be gamed, but the point is if you use VMAF with the goal of having integrity in your work and not trying to, pretend that your encoder is something better than it is, it's a very good metric. And everybody agrees, like, yeah, this correlation is really good. My eyes and what VMAF tells me, they tend to agree, right? And so, so it's actually allowed, the whole industry to like work and speak in one language when talking about video quality, and a language that, everybody kind of agrees on. And again, so that's perhaps, I'm not suggesting VCAT will be so impactful as VMAF, but perhaps that's kind of a good kind of analogy or corollary that VCAT would be to video decode performance as VMAF is to quality.
We talked about extending VCAT perhaps to iOS. What other extensions do you see out there being interesting to the market?
In terms of, so even though I'll call this VCAT, eventually we would probably call it VCAT Decoder. So in terms of, is there a use outside the mobile? I don't know. Perhaps not. Perhaps there is, but I would say from my perspective, it's really a mobile device issue because that's you're unplugged, you got battery, right? These are the concerns. But as far as like, what other things could we be doing? Like with VCAT, think about VCAT encoder, right? Which is a different problem than VCAT decoder. But imagine, because you don't encode video nonstop for 10 hours, right? To say that I can encode a video for 10 hours, people are like, oh, that's interesting, but who cares, right? But what we do is, the apps, YouTube, Meta, whoever, anybody who's grabbing video and uploading it, they have to make transcoding decisions. And those decisions have implications. So to me, a VCAT encoder, which I would love to build, would really be different. Like, let's take all the available software encoders plus the hardware decoder on the device. And if you're familiar with the power, the cost-benefit encoder comparison model that Yannis Katsavanitis and Ryan and others from Meta have really kind of brought out into the industry, I kind of envision like generating a power consumption versus compression efficiency graph across all the codecs would be available to run hardware and software on a given device. I think that would be really cool. So VCAT encoder is one. A lot of apps now are GPU heavy, right? And again, GPU is not a problem on the high end, but it's a problem on low end. So perhaps a VCAT GPU would be a really cool tool. And then finally, NPU, right? Because we're moving to a lot of neural network, AI, and perhaps having some kind of NPU VCAT, right? Running a set of, and the problems would be different because, like, for encoders, we're not looking at battery drain, but conceptually, it's the same goal, and that's to establish a benchmarking model that everybody could agree on. And the primary purpose for all of these is to get understanding into the low-end devices. That's really what this is all about, right? Because, I mean, no matter what we're doing, everybody's building their apps and tools to the high-end devices, right? So it's really about trying to get benchmarks and establish benchmarks and baselines at the low end, and perhaps influence, like over time, for the low-end devices to actually get better, within cost boundaries and stuff.
Who might be interested in that VCAT encoder? Who are you thinking might want to sponsor something like that?
I don't want to name companies, but perhaps, one of my former employers might be interested in it. Perhaps a YouTube or TikTok, anybody who's generating video, making encoding decisions on a device. It just asks a question like, I have a hardware HEVC and a hardware H.264 encoder on a given device. We assume HEVC is better, but when you actually do encodes, sometimes that's not the case, right? Sometimes the HEVC encoder in hardware on a device is nothing but the AVC with the video put into the, mapped into the HEVC bitstream model. That's not always the case, but we have seen that where HEVC is literally no better than AVC hardware on that device. What if you throw X264 in there? What if you use X264 very fast, which would probably outperform HEVC hardware encoding on most devices? How would that impact your battery, right? What's a battery drain? How much could you get? What if you used SVT-AV1, right, which, could meet the power drain of X264 very fast? How would that work? And, just being able to have all that information in it, like, here's all the codecs available, VV, Enc, whatever. Here's all the ones available to run on these devices. And in terms of power spent versus, quality delivered, these are your curves, right? And then I think no matter what your video problem is, that this would actually be very useful information. If you're capturing video and transcoding video on a device, this would be very useful information. By the way, this is all non-real time. I'm not even like low latency. Like, though these have low latency or real time possibilities, right now we're not doing anything in that domain.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that the few days I spent testing VCAT, I was just really impressed with how much additional information I could get. That is really, you don't really need it on the computer because, as you say, battery's not an issue, and you can see your CPU usage.
Yeah.
But man, testing Android it's just a luxury, and I'm sure anybody who does any kind of performance testing on an Android is going to want it.
That's my hope, and my hope is not just that people want to use it, but it'd be great to see like contributions start coming in, right? New features, new capabilities, missing features, improvements, right? I don't want to assume that that we've done everything the right way or the best way, and so to me that would be the real proof. Not just people are using it, but there's actually a community out there that's making investments. Developers are making investments in VCAT and submitting new code. and improvements.
Okay, so if I want it, how do I get it? You said the beta is going to be available. I mean, today is Thursday, the 31st. So when's the beta going to be available, and how do people get it?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So the beta will be private. It will be a private deployment on Play Store, invitation only. I will post out on LinkedIn a Google form that anybody can go in and fill out. I don't, I'm not screening. If you take the time to fill out the form, I will get you in the beta, and you will get an email invitation through the Play Store testing system. That once I put in, here's all the people, Play Store will send emails out to everybody. Here's a link, and then from the Android you will download it, and you could run it there. So the goal is to have this all handled through the Android app ecosystem, not doing anything out of channel or out of band. No downloading APKs from Google Drive or anything like that. We want to do it all through Play Store.
Okay. Anything else? Have we missed anything?
No, I think I guess I'll just I'll say that I retired at the end of May, and because we were a little behind with VCAT due to the issues, retirement so far has not been quite as much fun as I anticipated. I didn't expect to spend more time heads down coding after I stepped out of full-time work than I was while I was at full-time, but. So I've been very busy. Idiom's been very busy. We've been working really, really hard, especially with the rewrite. But we're really, really happy with where things are now, and seeing all these. We had all these problems that were just like caused by the model. Which by the way, I'm not in any way dissing the work that Video Labs did. It was beautiful. The benchmark tool, everything is beautiful. VLC is phenomenal. It just turns out that the mobile ecosystem, that benchmark hasn't been maintained for almost 6 years, and everything's moved so far, it just wasn't possible to carry that model forward. But we've been working really hard. I've been pushing myself, but I've actually been enjoying what I'm doing. It's been a long time since I've been heads down working on code like this, and seeing VCAT up and running, going to beta is just really going to be exciting, and I'll get to chill for a little bit, enjoy some retirement.
Okay, we're all for that. Listen, thanks for taking the time. Good work. I'm looking forward to getting my copy. Hopefully you'll send me one. And
absolutely.
And thanks for taking the time today to show us off the new VCAT.
Thanks, Jan. Have a great day.
You too.